Today I'm making a quick tier list for the World Championships with some of my opinions, and I'll be talking about how I'm looking at the decks, ranking them based on what's most likely to win, and then I'm also going to have the meta predictions for the popularity over on the right side here on trainerhill.com. So let's get into it. Going to try to make this a pretty quick one today. We'll start with the S tier decks. These are the decks that, if I was playing in the World Championships this weekend, these are the decks I would be choosing between to try to win the entire event. Or at least I think if you can play these decks at a very high level and you have confidence in your deck lists and your matchup concepts, then these decks are probably the ones that are going to give you the best chance of winning with that kind of preparation. And so I think Gardevoir and Dragapult Dusknoir go into that S tier. Um, they are not unbeatable by any means, but their matchup spreads are very, very good in the fact that there's not really anything that they can't beat. Dragapult Dusknoir, of course, has you're combining the powerful draw engine of Dracloak, the powerful damage spread of Dragapult, the very, very powerful effect of Dusclops and Dusknoir, both for the prize card manipulation and the damage placement. You're using Neo Upper, which is almost like pseudo cheating energy into play. So you're doing a lot of very, very strong stuff with this deck. And because of the Dusk Noirs, you can get around a lot of stuff. Also, because of the Neo Upper, you can more easily attack with Dusk Noir versus something like Crustle. The deck just has a lot of outs to anything that can come up against it. So it doesn't have fantastic matchups, but it also can sneak a win out of just about anything. So when you are a very, very experienced player and you're going to be playing a lot of games where the opponent is also good and the opponent has created very good decks, and you know that you're going to be playing against good decks, good players, in a small amount of rounds at Worlds, maybe like 8 rounds day one, then a couple of rounds day two, then top cut. A deck like Dragapult Dusknoir that gives you a fighting chance at beating just about anything you might come up against sounds pretty good. Now Gardevoir is pretty similar. It does have some matchups that are probably a little harder than Dragapult Dusknoir's hardest matchups, but then Gardevoir also has some matchups that are better than Dragapult Dusknoir's best matchups. So Gardevoir has a really good time into Raging Bolt, which is typically a pretty popular deck. Now, I am talking about specifically the Masters Division age group right here. I think Raging Bolt gets more popular each notch down into the lower age divisions. But if you look at like the Asian circuit tournaments, a lot of the Masters Division Asian events recently too. Their major events have been won and also kind of dominated by Raging Bolt. So I think Raging Bolt could be pretty popular in the Masters division for this Worlds as well. So that's a good matchup to have from Gardevoir. And then Gardevoir is also going to be naturally favored into the Dragapult variants that are not Dragapult Charizard. Dragapult Charizard, some people say it's even, some people say it's favored for either side. I'd say it's about slightly favored for Dragapult Charizard. It's still a pretty close matchup, which again is something nice for Gardevoir. Now, something else nice for Gardevoir is that it has a multitude of attackers and options. Now, not every deck is going to have them all, but you have Screamtail and Drifloon and Fluttermane, you have Bravery Charm, you have Devo, you have Klefki potentially. There's a lot of different stuff you could do with the deck, and of course, Monkey Dory. Monkey Dory is so powerful. So a deck like Crustle or a deck like Ethan's Typhlosion that's trying to counter most of the meta, those decks don't counter Gardevoir. So Gardevoir is kind of a gatekeepy deck for some of the anti-meta, some of the single prize stuff, because Gardevoir does the single prize stuff just as good as a full single prize deck while having Gardevoir EX on the bench. So yeah, I think Gardevoir is very, very strong, very versatile, and Dragapult Dusknoir also very strong, very versatile. I think these two decks are definitely either options for a lot of strong players this weekend, or strong players want to beat these decks going into Worlds. Then in A tier, now these are just going to be a notch, just a tiny bit lower than S. We have Grimmsnarl, we have Goldango. Let's start with those two for now. So Grimmsnarl is very strong. It's favored into Gardevoir. It's slightly at least favored into most Dragapult variants. It's not that bad against Raging Bolt. It's actually pretty close against Raging Bolt. It's good against Charizard variants. Um, Grimmsnarl is just a pretty strong deck, and it's good against the best deck in format. If you agree that Gardevoir is the best deck in format, I know in my August best decks video, which was recorded a little over 2 weeks ago, at that point I was saying that Grimmsnarl was the best deck in format, and Grimmsnarl is very good, but I think that Gardevoir probably still takes the crown now, looking at it a couple of weeks later. Grimmsnarl's real downfall is it doesn't have draw power, so that's a problem. Goldango's actually, on paper, I think Goldango beats all the other decks we have on the tier list right now. The Dragapult variants, the Gardevoir, and the Grimmsnarl. However, Goldango is pretty linear and pretty easy to counter. So those are kind of the reasons why Goldango is not just the best deck in format. I think it's really consistent, really powerful, but it can be countered, so that's kind of scary. I want to put Straight Dragapult into the A tier as well. It basically, looking at Straight Dragapult, its matchups are worse than Dragapult Dusknoir's on paper, but the deck is quite consistent, and it does have some other game plans that the Dragapult Dusknoir variant doesn't have, like Crustle. Not Crustle, like Maractus. I don't know why I said Crustle. It has the Maractus with Corner. Um, it has more gust effects. Like I said, it's just going to be a little bit more consistent. Typically going to find favor against other Dragapult variants, because if you're more consistent, if you have more Monkey Dory on the board, you're going to be able to find an advantage against other Dragapults that maybe don't have their monkey down, that are missing gust effects at some points. So Straight Dragapult is pretty strong. Its consistency definitely gives it a big boost. And then I don't really love Joltik Box as a deck, but I am going to put it as A tier here, because Joltik Box's matchup spread looks pretty good. It basically doesn't have anything worse than like a 40-60, which is really nice to have. And then it does have a good Grimmsnarl matchup. It even takes some favor against Gardevoir when Gardevoirs are moving away from the Bravery Charm build, so we'll have to see what that looks like, what the Gardevoir builds are actually looking like. Because without Bravery Charms, you can't go like double Guardy and then have two monkeys each with a Bravery Charm on them. So Iron Hands can actually do more work farther into the matchup when they're not playing Bravery Charm. But yeah, Joltik Box has a pretty good matchup spread. It's a pretty linear deck. You don't get to do a lot of cool stuff with it. You don't get to think for yourself a lot, but hey, this is the World Championships. You don't really care how you get there if you win, right? Winning the World Championships is an amazing feat. So even if you do it with a deck that is a little linear, hey, it's still a World Championships win, or top 4, top 8, or whatever you might be able to get with Joltik Box. So Joltik Box, I think, is yeah, it's actually a pretty real contender. And then I am going to add Raging Bolt at the very bottom of A tier. I think Raging Bolt's matchup spread does not look very good right now. Um, Raging Bolt's matchup against Joltik has actually worsened since Raging Bolts began all cutting Slitherwing, which was a very good attacker versus the Joltik box deck. There are Raging Bolts. Some of them play Cornerstone to get increased percentages into Grimmsnarl and Frostlass. I'm sorry, Grimmsnarl and Goldango. Goldango used to be a favored matchup for Raging Bolt just straight up without any techs, but now Goldango has become a better deck. It's just a more consistent deck. It's a little bit stronger because of that. So the matchup has grown much closer to even between those, which makes Raging Bolt a little bit worse. Unless they do, like I said, tech that Cornerstone Ogerpon. But yeah, Raging Bolt, I could easily put this in B tier, I feel, but it is a strong deck. Honestly, pretty consistent with the Fan Rotom, Noctowl, Ditto, all of that stuff in the early turns. So it can be aggressive, can be consistent, it can win games because of that. So I'm putting it at the very bottom of A tier, even though I don't really like its matchup spread right now. And then in B tier, I think B tier, this is going to be kind of my cutoff for decks that I think can seriously make a run for top 8. Like, I'm pretty much expecting top 8 to be almost just the S and A decks. Or maybe I should even say the asymmetrical cut. But we could even say, top 32. Top 32 at Worlds is still a great achievement. So yeah, B might be my cutoff for these decks can make top 32 at Worlds. And then C and D, I'm probably thinking you're not really playing those to get great placements, or you're playing them uh looking at like a very risky matchup spread, hoping to feast and not famine on the good matchups. So B tier, we're going to put Charizard Pidgeot, which Charizard Pidgeot's a deck I like because of how functional it is. Pidgeot EX is a fantastic card. Charizard EX is very, very overtly strong and sets itself up. There's a lot to like about that. And it also has the Chi-Yu, which gives it a good matchup into the Goldengo. We'll put Dragapult Charizard in there as well. And I am going to put Gardevoir Jellicent in here because I don't think Gardevoir Jellicent, even if it's a worse of the Gardevoir variants, it can't be that much farther removed than S to B tier from regular Guardy. And Gardevoir Jellicent does have some good things about it, but I think just regular Guardy without the Jellicent has proven to be better. And then we're also going to put Crustle here because Crustle does have some good things going for it, like a good Grimmsnarl, Goldengo, Dragapult matchup. It has a good matchup into all of those. Good matchup into Joltik Box. Uh 50-50, maybe slightly favored into Raging Bolt Ogerpon. Good against the Dragapult Charizards that don't play Chi-Yu. Maybe can even get through the Chi-Yu ones. Charizard Pidgeot, I think it's also favored even though they play Chi-Yu. So Crustle has some good matchups. I'm not mentioning its S tier matchups, of course, because those are bad. Gardevoir is very, 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 very bad. And then Dragapult Dusknoir is like you'd want to beat Dragapult decks, but you can't always beat the Dragapult Dusknoir because of what Dusknoir does. You can still get wins against that for sure. But yeah, so Crustle has a pretty appealing matchup spread, which is going to land it into the B tier for me as well. And then I guess I'd also put Flareon here. Flareon, inconsistent, very hard to play, but it has a similar idea of Crustle. Like, it doesn't beat Guardy, but I think it beats Guardy more often than Crustle does, actually. And then it probably beats Dragapult Dusknoir more often than Crustle does as well, or maybe they're both just as bad against Dragapult Dusknoir. But some of the other good matchups aren't as good for Crustle. Like Flareon Noctowl versus Goldengo is like a 65-35, maybe 70-30. If they're playing Rigid Band, it's better for Goldengo. But then Crustle is like Goldengo doesn't have a chance at beating Crustle typically. So I think Flareon Noctowl and Crustle can find each other with kind of similar matchups spreads at the end of the day, but where Crustle has much more volatile matchups. And then in tier C, I'm gonna put the decks where I could see it working out because of like a good matchup here and there, or like hit like I was saying, feast on your good matchups. So End Zorark is good against Gardevoir. It's good against Dragapult decks. Suffers against a lot of the other stuff, but it's good against the very, very top, especially since people aren't playing Shaman much to protect the bench. I'd also put Terrabox in C, similar reason, not a lot of Shaman, and also you can use Cornerstone in here to like wall out Goldango and stuff. Charizard Dusknoir, not going to put it in here because of matchups necessarily, because a lot of the matchups are like, did you high roll? So I'm just going to put Charizard Dusknoir here. I don't expect a ton of people to play it though. I think Roaring Moon is kind of a C tier deck probably because you can get early wins with like the poison stuff and just being a fast deck. You're also dark type into Gardevoir, so it has some okay things, but again, not expecting a lot of people to play it. This Ogre Pond deck has seemed fine with like Cornerstone, Water Pond, Teal Mask, Clefairy, the Ogre switching item card. And then we have Toad Scroll, and the thing about Toad Scroll is it does have a really good time into Goldengo, a pretty good time into Grimmsnarl, a pretty good time into Dragapult variants, not so much Dusknoir. But then, it's going to struggle against Gardevoir. It's going to struggle against Raging Bolt. I think we could probably put Toad Scroll into C. It's not absolutely awful. Like, the decks in D tier are the ones where I'd be like, do not, like, waste your World's Run on this. And I'd probably say Ho-Oh Box, Frostlass Monkey, Festival Lead. I just think these decks are fragile. I think this is just almost always worse than the Grimmsnarl version. But I'd say Ethan's Typhlosion and Cynthia's Garchomp are good enough to at least put up into C tier. And then for the meta predictions, I'd say Dragapult variants are probably going to reach close to 20%. Let's say Dragapult Dusknoir at like 9, and then the other two Dragapult variants at like 5 and 5. Or maybe even a little more straight Dragapult, like maybe 6 straight Dragapult, maybe 4 Dragapult Charizard. And there's going to be about 700 Masters or so, so each percent, think of it as counting as like 7 people. I'm predicting like 7 people will play it for each 1% kind of thing. Gardevoir, I think I'll say like 10% Gardevoir, 2% Gardevoir Jellicent for a total of like 12% Gardevoir decks. And when I see what the total of this looks like, I might have to bump up some of these numbers. I can totally see Goldengo reaching like upwards of 14, but I think the hype has fallen off a good bit for it, so I'm going to say 10 for Goldengo. And Grimmsnarl is very, very good, but a lot of top players don't want to play it because of how bricky and there's not draw support in the deck. So I'm going to say Grimmsnarl Frostlass. I'm going to bring it down to 8. Joltik Box, I'm going to say 8. There's going to be people who are just not as prepared as the rest of the field, and I know a deck like Joltik Box can still take them through. So I think Joltik Box will have a fair amount of people on it. Then for Raging Bolt, I'm going to say at least 10. I might be bumping this up when I see how much many more percents we need to hit 100%. And also remember, this is a world, so there's less like random bad decks being played and entered into the tournament. Charizard Pidgeot, we'll say maybe like 3 or 4% on that. I'll say 4. Crustle, I'll say like maybe 2 to 3%. We'll say 3. Flareon, probably around the same, about 3%. And Zoroark, I'd say even lower. I'd say 2 for Enzoroark. Like, that would be 14 people playing Enzoroark. Terrabox, we'll give Terrabox a 2%. We'll give Charizard a 2%. We'll give some of these just like 1s or 0.5s. Like, Roaring Moon, I think, is a 0.5. The Ogre Pond deck, I think, is a 0.5. Toad Scroll, probably a 0.5. I'll say Ethan's Typhlosion is like a 1 or a 2. I could see people actually playing that. And then I'm going to put Cynthia's Garchomp as a 5 as well. Hello Armor Rouge, maybe a handful of people play that. And then I'll put Frostlass Monkey and Festival Leave both at a 0.5. So I have to add 11% here. We'll give Dragapult Dusknoir a few more percent. We'll give Guardy a few more percent. Let's see. Maybe we'll bump up. I mean, Ethan's Typhlosion has caught some attention recently. We could maybe bring that up to a 3. And Zoroark, and Zoroark is a meta call. And Zoroark, people might be thinking I'm even underrating Zoroark, so that's possible just because it's good against the stage 2 stuff. But I don't expect more than about a dozen people to actually bring Zoroark. I'd be surprised. We'll probably bring Grimmsnarl up to 10. Maybe Goldengo up to 12. Maybe Raging Bolt up to 12. And yeah, I have a lot even because like a lot of these can really go plus or minus like 4%, right? Like we could see Goldengo reach maybe 15% max. We could see any of these decks really go up a little bit more, but that's roughly what I'm expecting. That roughly these decks are what you really want to be thinking about. Like the Dragapult variants combined if you can for your decks, and then Goldengo, Gardevoir, Raging Bolt, Grimmsnarl, Joltik. It's not that unlikely to expect to hit these decks. But then when you get down into here, like the 1, 2, 3, 4% decks, don't be basing your tournament off of all of these unless you add them like all up to equal like 40% and then your matchup against all of them is bad. That's a little bit of a different story. But yeah, that's my tier list and my meta predictions for Worlds. Good luck if you are playing, and have fun watching if you are just spectating. I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.